It's indeed my proud privilege and pleasure to moderate this panel, which has very distinguished experts, which cover range technologies, wide range of expertise. What I plan to do is we are a little short of time, and I know that Diego has to leave at precisely one. So, what I would do is, with a short introduction of the panelists, I would straightway go to the topic. And I have pleasure in introducing our first speaker today, Dr. Reggie Mathai, the Director of Automotive Research Association of India, with his 28 plus years experience in engine, vehicle testing, emissions, ambient air quality measurement studies. He is an expert truly to talk about what we should do to carve our emission roadmap in future. With BTech from Indore, MTech from Banaras Hindu University, and doctorate from IIT Delhi, Dr. Mathai is deeply involved in regulation standardization. He is the chair of Automotive Industry Standards Committee with 50 plus research papers to his credit at national and international level conferences and two patents. I have a great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Reggie Mathai to the panel. Our next speaker and the expert is Mr. Diego Graffi, who is the Chairman and Managing Director of Piaggio Vehicles Private Limited. He joined Piaggio in 2006 and handled various responsibilities. In fact, 2017, he was appointed as the head of Piaggio India. And before coming to India, he has been tracking India's development, technology, and therefore is very keen to contribute the international expertise for developing Indian regulations. Apart from Piaggio, he also has experience in working with companies like Fiat and Moto Guzzi. He holds the mechanical engineering degree to his credit. So welcome, Diego. The third speaker today is Anjali Pandey, who is the Vice President and heads the engine and component business in Cummins India Limited. She also heads powertrain and electrification business. She's associated with Cummins India since 2001, where she joined as a fresh graduate, very similar to what I have done in my early part of the career as a training engineer at the area. Anjali grew with the organization. And with the production engineering qualification, she also has to her credit Six Sigma Black Belt certifications. She's also done masters in business administration with the finance and strategy as a specialization. She has won several awards and recognitions in business leadership and technology. And she is a strong advocate of diversity at the workplace. So welcome, Anjali. And our fourth speaker is Mr. Sudipta Basu, who is a BTech, holds a BTech in mechanical engineering from IIT Kanpur. With 40 plus years of experience in powertrain and after treatment development, he has a wide experience in working with OEMs as well as after treatment manufacturers and research institutes like AVL. He's currently the executive director of ECMA, and he has worked extensively in numerous successful projects for development of engines and after treatment solutions specifically for India. So welcome, Sudipta. So with that panel, let us move on to our topic of building a suitable regulatory environment. We had heard in previous discussions as well as panels an appeal, I would say almost an appeal, that India must have a clear roadmap, especially for emissions. While of course this always has been a discussion and a demand from industry as well as the developers. What do we really understand by roadmap? Actually, and I request all the four panelists in next 2 to 3 minutes each, if you can highlight according to you what roadmap, what it means to you to develop a roadmap. Say, clarity in where do we want to go, clarity in what do we want to achieve, and clarity in how do we want to achieve is, in my view, the three key aspects of any roadmap. Uh, we have a confusing situation that there is a powertrain development which is leading us to electrification, hybridization, therefore has a larger impact on CO2 emission norms. Along with it, there's a lot of discussion happening on post BS6 or post beyond BS6, and we heard the previous speakers talk about it. So I would start with Dr. Mathai, if you can highlight what are your views about the future roadmap.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, and thank you for that introduction. And it's a privilege to be on this panel, especially addressing the emission regulatory roadmap and how India should be, or my views on how India needs to move ahead. So before going into that aspect, how we initiated this, just let me give a brief background on that so that will put us on a good level to understand how we should move ahead. Way back in 2003, when the emission regulations were first thought of at that time, the government put into place the first auto fuel policy committee to draw emission roadmap, a regulatory roadmap for India as such. Now that deliberation took into consideration all the stakeholders, the engine manufacturers, the fuel OMCs, and this was given, and the timelines up to 2010, how BS2, BS3, and BS4 emission norms should be put into place in a staggered way, giving priority to cities and places which had a lot of emission inventory coming up. When this was put into place, they also gave a lot of other recommendations. Somehow we have been very focused on what OEMs, the engine manufacturers, should do and what the OMCs should do. And there were other recommendations. If somebody goes into the details, there were a lot of other recommendations like the inspection centers, fuel management, basically the quality of fuel. And these are being taken into account now as time is going on. But following that, there was a need again felt somewhere in between, that was in around 2007 and 8, to understand how this is impacting really. Are this really getting an impact on what is being done? So for that, they did a source apportionment study. This was the first one the government constituted in 2008 to assess what is happening and are we on the right path. And that study brought forth again certain realities, like transport sector's contribution was around 20 to 29-30% on the PM and the NOx part, while the dust and all those things also have a severe contribution. This has been debated at various forums, but this was a study constituted by them and the report submitted by CPCB. Following which, there was a gap after that. The roadmap means till 2010, the BS4, and in all these times, India went through two regulatory norms. Means it was not one country, one norm sort of a thing. Certain parts it was BS3, certain parts it was BS4. So various claims or various warranty requirements of the OEMs could never be taken care of at that time, and it was given, little leeway was given on that. The next committee was constituted in 2005, 14, 15. Again, the committee deliberated and they put up the roadmap for BS5, BS6 regime. When this was placed before the government and the government felt the need to move ahead and cut one of that's a BS5, and we leapfrogged into BS6. This was, although there were a lot of challenges in implementing it, and because the timelines, the readiness of the industry, the readiness of the spare matter, all these things came into being. But we should appreciate both the automotive sector and the oil sector for implementing it and putting into place. Along with that came the CAFE norms also, which I think is one of the key ones now going to play a role in the coming times. Now, when we speak of these roadmaps, so there is a timelines given, normally around 4 to 5 years, some clarity given on what is to be attained. And in most of these cases, this has been technology agnostic, means you have been given a value limit sort of a thing. It was left how you can attain it. And I think looking into future also, if such a clarity for the longer run, now we are again reaching a stage like last time what has happened in 2015, 14, 15. Now what we have is only the RDE as of now. And there is a lot of deliberations going on. Along with it, the CAFE norms. Yes, as in one of the previous sessions also, this was deliberated in details, and I think in future, again, we can speak on that. I think on my opening remarks, I will just say that we need a clarity on what we need to attain, as was done in the past, with certain timelines and certain broad contours so that the industry can move along with it. And with that, I think this is just my opening remarks on that.
Thank you, Dr. Mathai. May I request Mr. Grafi to highlight how does it have an impact on 2- and 3-wheeler, especially the industry, which is so sensitive to the cost, the development efforts that are needed. Any opening remarks that you have?
Yeah, thank you, madam. Thank you, Autocar, for inviting me today. I think it's really privileged to share views of us as an OEM on this very important topic that definitely has been, at least in the last 2-3 years, the main important topic for development for every automotive OEM that is being playing in India, independent by the segment. But I share in my view, so I joined, as you correctly remember in your presentation, I joined Piaggio India as Managing Director in 2017. Right in the moment in which the transition to Bharat 4 was just happened. So it was already, how to say, a big challenge to follow at that point in time to meeting the transition for all our product portfolio to Bharat 4. With a quite relevant and consistent increase of cost that luckily we have been able to absorb quite fully, integrally, without reverting it into, how to say, our customer in prices of our vehicle. Once reached, we have to start working quite closely for a transition Bharat 6, because as you correctly remember, Bharat 4 was taken a decision to jump completely, and transition to Bharat 6 was placed for beginning of 2020. So 3 years of time to convert all our product portfolio, both 3-wheeler and 2-wheeler, to Bharat 6 was definitely a very much bigger challenge from any point of view. From the point of view of technical and technological capability, not only us, but also our vendor base. Introduction a completely new kind of technology that worth to mention because it is nearly impossible to meet the Bharat 6 emission norm without having a full transition to electronic fuel injection. So as you know, all, for example, 2-wheeler until Bharat 4 were mostly equipped with carburetor, while transition to Bharat 6, we had to apply electronic fuel injection norm. Same was valid also for 3-wheeler. So you have high level of electric and electronic applied to our vehicle. So definitely it was a challenge from, as I was saying, R&D capability and know-how point of view. Luckily, we have been quite well supported by our vendor base locally here in India and by our headquarters in Italy to meet the transition right in time. But the biggest challenge, as you correctly remembered, was in terms of cost, an impact in terms of cost, because for example, for a diesel three-wheeler, the transition to Bara 6 means an increase of cost in the range of, at vehicle level, of 20-25%. And it's impossible actually to think to revert all of it integrally to final customer, because it will be a shock, it will be a trauma. So no customer will be able to, coming from a Bara 3 or Bara 4 vehicle, is capable to absorb. So we had to be very creative in introducing also, how to say, creative tools to reabsorb this cost from certain point of view and make so that customer were less impacted, like retail financing tool, financing scheme, and something like that. So the challenge definitely has been very high. What I coming to the point of roadmap ahead, I think that okay, let me give an overview as an outlook as automotive maker. So I'm not talking about what most probably is needed, because if you look at what is most probably needed, look at the level of pollution in main metropolitan areas in India, should be to go to zero emission as soon as possible. So most probably to oblige all automotive to convert to electric in the shortest time possible. But this is definitely the wish. We have to look at what is feasible, what is sustainable, also from economical point of view. So I think that my hope, let me say, from this point of view, is that for all segments, and this is object of a frequent discussion in the SIAM meetings that we have quite frequently, is that to give now OEM the time to reabsorb, also from the investment point of view, the impact of Bara 6 that, as I was saying, has been definitely disruptive. And if we have to make evolution, and further evolution definitely are required, to define a deadline that is giving time to OEM to reabsorb the investment they cost bear so far, and properly plan for the way ahead. It's worth to mention that now with Bara 6 emission level of vehicle in India are now comparable to the one that we have in Europe. So I do not see personally now the need to put further stricter norms in very short time. I think that now we need to define definitely roadmap that is giving clear deadline and clear timeline for the way ahead, but is giving also OEM the time to reabsorb the investment done for transition to Bara 6 and probably plan for the next steps.
Thank you. That's a very clear statement, and you represented SIM viewpoint as a manufacturer, not just 2-3 wheelers. I would therefore come to Anjali now, who has been handling heavy vehicles as well as off-highway industry. So on both these sectors, Anjali, how do you see the roadmap appearing? Is there any clarity, or what are your opening views?
Sure. So thank you, Rashmi, for setting this up. Like Mr. Diago was mentioning, the need for roadmap is really important. And we've had that, like Dr. Reggie pointed out in the past, and that really helped plan things, plan the entire ecosystem when it comes to supply chain, when it comes to just getting end users ready. Making sure that we've taken care of foolproofing, right? Because the entire purpose of offering, the higher technology systems is to reduce emissions, right? So just making the ecosystem ready around this is very, very critical. Not to say for the businesses that are investing, giving them time to recoup their investments and developing capability in country. What happens is if it's a disruptive roadmap where you're not clear about what is coming in which segment, the planning around this doesn't happen holistically. And so you end up importing more. That's not in line with how we want to shape up the country's capability as well. So it's got multiple implications if not done properly. And what we've seen is while on the BS6, it was a humongous effort from the industry, the oil companies, and certainly the end user also accepting the challenge of greater technology coming their way. it just needs, it required a lot of effort, a lot of money, right, got invested. And so we need to see sustainability of these. Now coming to segmental impact, so I think on the on-highway side, right, the roadmap to some extent is clear, Rashmi. It will be helpful if we clarify the fuel economy norms very, very clearly and squarely to say how this will all converge to Vecto or where is it going, right? I think that needs to still be established.
Absolutely.
See, I think we are coming up with another change in 23, right, where we are moving to OBD-C. If the fuel economy norms can come together and the avatar of the fuel economy norms is clear, I think it just helps in terms of the overall development. So that's, and then from there onwards, right, OBD-D, when Euro 7 is going to come, right, clarification on the electric roadmap, right, as well, because there's a whole ecosystem readiness that is needed there as well. So in the absence, it just makes it harder. And it, you can't come up with smarter plans if there is ambiguity for future. So that's on highway. Off highway, again, I think if I'll talk about construction, some of the other, this just a bit of clarity that is needed as to when what will be coming, right? That's still in the works. It's not announced. And I know teams are working in terms of bringing that clarity. But the sooner the better. I have seen globally in some of the regions, we are giving 10-year roadmaps, and between one emission to another emission, there is a 5-year period that is granted for industry to get ready and the ecosystem to get ready around that. So that will be very, very useful to have. So while there is an element of clarity that is there is much more that is needed to be ready and to be ready properly, right, for embracing some of these technology norms. It also opens up the avenue for newer businesses to sort of thrive as these emissions change happen, for them to invest in time to be able to serve the country. So for the entire country, this is the right approach. And we have some commitments, right, as a part of the global arrangements. Therefore, it's all the more important that these roadmaps are laid out in time for the rest of the country to follow.
Excellent. Yes. Let me now seek views from Sudipto. You have been an important part of the development and the supply chain that is having an impact on after treatment and the way BS6 was designed in most of the cases. What are your views, Sudipto?
First of all, good afternoon, Rashmi, to you and to my fellow panelists, and also to the about 200 participants who are listening in. And thanks to Autocar Professional and their team to have ECMA on board here. Yes, Rashmi, you're right. The emission control manufacturers have been a very important and integral part of getting this BS6 in place. And as we heard yesterday from Dr. Goenka in his first keynote address, it indeed was a stupendous achievement by all concerned, by the OEM, by the oil industry, by oil suppliers, the aftermarket industry, and done in a very short span of time, even by global standards. Having said that, excuse me, Anjali, if I repeat some of what you have already said, but I will speak from the perspective of the after-treatment industry, because fortunately or unfortunately, almost or maybe all of our after-treatment industry members are globally based, some in North America, some in Europe, some in Japan, and fortunately for us, almost all of them are located here in India with their own plants. Having said that, as soon as I talk about a plant, it means a lot of investment that goes into it. And when the plant is supposed to make a product, that product has to be specific for that market, specific for that environment, and specific for the application. Now here I talk about BS6 because when we moved from BS4 to BS6, especially with the after treatment, there has been a tremendous amount of change because the jump was quite big. And there have been a lot of technologies that did not exist at all in India, even though they existed in some form in the rest of the world. And when I say this, because India is a very specific market, and so even if the technologies existed, they had to be engineered for the Indian market, and that meant a lot of work, a lot of R&D, a lot of development to be done on this specific for the Indian market. And therefore, you needed a specific, let's say I'll use the word roadmap as to what the application needed to meet. That is one. The other aspect is in terms of the actual products that were going to be required to meet the BS6 emission norms. There were some new things that never existed in India earlier. The first of that was the digital particulate filter. The diesel particulate filter. I'll use it. I say particulate filter. That was a new thing for which not only did after treatment manufacturers have to make investments, but also new facilities had to be created to be able to handle this particular product. Then we had the selective catalytic reduction or SCR. We had the lean NOx traps, which also required specific lines to be manufactured. Now, when you do that, and when you make investments of such large nature, and I'm not talking about the substrates, because substrate manufacturers have not localized in India specifically because very huge investments need to be made, and the volumes at the moment do not justify making an Indian facility. Having said that, substrates do have to be imported, and I'll talk about that later, why imports are also related to having a steady or a specific roadmap. So coming back to the facilities and the infrastructure for BS6, the investments that needed to be made have to be, as Anjali said, have to be amortized over a certain period of time, a certain number of products, and there is where a roadmap and a clear direction as to what the life cycle volumes are going to be is very, very important to make that investment worthwhile and to make our industry survive in this environment. And that is the aspect which needs to be considered and kept in mind when somebody is making and fixing a roadmap for a particular period. It's not just the roadmap; it is also the timeline which is important, and also the consistency that is held in implementing that timeline. Now, this was one aspect. The other aspect is the after-treatment industry is very, very heavily dependent on precious metals. Now, these precious metals do not belong to the after-treatment industry; they belong to the end customer, that is the person who buys the product. But the time at which the investment, or let's say the purchase of the raw material has to be done, is about 3 or 4 months removed from the time at which the customer buys this. And these precious metals are something that fluctuate very heavily in price. Most of them are not available in India; they have to be imported. So there are foreign exchange variations that take place, and the variation could be so high that if we miscalculate in forecasting or purchasing for a particular product 4 months down the line, it could completely wipe out the industry. So from that perspective, the forecast or consistency or projections that the market makes is also very important. And for that, regulations are one thing that need to be consistent and remain fixed, or at least laid out in a way that does not change. So this is the second aspect. The third aspect that I would like to say is, now again looking at it at long term, and we heard about this in the previous sessions also, that when you have to really scramble to design or make and produce a product, you are probably not able to access all the means to be able to design and manufacture a product which really is going to meet the requirements of that market. Here, India, we just heard, is a very, very cost-sensitive market. So, have we got sufficient time to be able to meet the expectations of cost of our customers in such a short time? I cannot say that. If we had a longer period, maybe we would have been able to engineer a better product more suited for the Indian market, maybe. And so, therefore, we need to have, and as Anjali again pointed out, that globally, the projections are very, very long in terms of 5 years, 10 years. Whereas here, we have an announcement today, and within 2 or 3 years, we are having to get to the market. So this is something that we wanted to highlight over here, is a very intense planning proper consideration, and a very definitive roadmap rollout and adherence to that roadmap is extremely important for our industry.
Absolutely. So I think there is no second thought that we need a clarity, we need a clear direction and an action plan. All of us who are sitting here have an impact on the process of decision making. So moving forward on the same topic, how we can be of any support to the government or the regulators. I would come with a specific question, Dr. Mathai, to you, that we always have been looking at UNEC regulations as our guiding principles, and we know where UN regulations are going. Can we not take advantage of knowing what is happening in Europe and try to be clear in the country so that we lay down our own requirements much earlier than what is currently happening? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it seems we are always following the Europe, and we are in a manner, particularly for the emission regulations coming more or less aligned to it. And on the first look, it may seem that yes, we can take on whatever is happening there and adopt it. But we need to understand, as many of my speakers have been speaking about the industry sensitive matter and how India has a very cost conscious community over here. Now, there are the aspects that we differ significantly is on the CAFE norms, means on the CO2 regulations from the Europe. Otherwise, the emission norms, we are more or less aligned, and we are moving ahead with that. There are safety regulations anyway that doesn't form a part of this, but we are aligning with the European regulations as and when we are moving ahead with it. But let me come to the safety, the emission regulations part only. So on the BS6 and the RDE, we are almost moving ahead along with them. Means what is being done, and we are adopting it. We are doing our trials and seeing what should be the conformity factor. This is okay with us. But what makes us little different is our dependence on the import of fuel, and that is putting a lot of stress on the government to take decisions which are impacting the automotive sector also in a big way, particularly on the emission regulations part also. We have got now fuels we started with E10. We are moving to E20 now, but nothing is being spoken about the CAFE norms as such, how it is going to impact, or how it is going to impact the after treatment devices or the components. There are some studies done, but we are moving on to it. So we need to understand, as this was the first time when the government as a whole, where Niti Aayog had the meeting with DHI, with MORG, and with MOPNG, trying to bring in some synergy in the E20 implementation. So I think that such activities for the longer run with the clarity on the CAFE norms, because if CAFE norms is made the main controlling factor as in Europe, so the manufacturer also aligns with it. He knows what are the scope for him, available for him, which are the products he needs to manufacture more. And as the penalties come into play, he understands, he will work on the cost implications of it. I think that is where India needs to address, and India needs to move ahead on a holistic manner, where the OEM gets the flexibility, he gets the direction very clearly. This is how we are moving ahead. And I think on the regulatory front, this is my view on how we should be moving forward on.
Yeah, thank you. Let me ask you, Anjali. You have at Cummins handled not just conventional powertrains, but also alternate the energy, CNG, gaseous fuels, and also now electrification. Within your company, what will help you in strategizing these businesses more clearly than just knowing what each one of these is, leading to as far as the regulations are concerned?
Very, very interesting question, Rashmi. I'm of the view that, just a peanut butter approach may not work. So for example, what's worked in the Europe may not work, is what Dr. Mathai's point is also, and I am completely aligned to that. And I think there's an attempt to form teams where right representation of companies who've been there, done that before, and the regulatory authorities is being formed to sort of come to this roadmap of zero emissions, is the way I will put it, right? And I think Mr. Basu was talking about that, the approaches can be very different, right? Where does electric powertrain fit? Where does CNG fit? LNG fit? I think it's a very customized approach for India that will be needed, because we have our own challenges. Oil import is one challenge. The kind of landscape the country has is another challenge. We have our own challenges in terms of end user and the way they run their businesses. So, I think that there will be those adaptations that are needed for this country. It cannot be that, beyond this year, we move to complete electric or we stay with diesel, or, so that's where, what is the bridge to get to zero emissions is the question that we have to answer for India. Today, we, for example, the commercial fleet space, we are offering diesel. Diesel is a viable technology. There is a TCO associated for the end user. That's where it's cheaper. It makes sense for the truckers business today, right? And there is a roadmap for diesel to get to tighter emissions, zero emissions, things like that, right? So there is that roadmap available. And then there is this, alternate technologies that are available in terms of alternate fuels, LNG, CNG, electric. Now hydrogen is also being talked about. So where does that fit? And it's, it's almost like, diesel morphing into some kind of bridge technologies. I think the previous session was about that, to say, is it hybrid, mild hybrid, and then, gas. And then finally, in some segments, we move to electric. For example, today we are challenged on the electric for heavy duty trucks. Don't have the range, don't have the TCO, cost is too high. Well, if you're worried about oil import, we will be importing a bunch of things on the electric side as well, right? We don't have the India ecosystem supply chain wise ready to serve the electric needs, right? So, therefore, with segments, what are we talking? So I think that's where the transition and the roadmap needs to be made. This is in light of our commitment to emissions. This is in light of commitment to the fact that we have a TCO and there is a uniqueness for this country. Every business, every small business, a trucker business, needs to make the livelihood that they're making today, and yet we move the agenda on the emission side. So it's a complex problem to solve. It requires collective brainstorming. It certainly requires people who have the inputs from how it is done in different countries, right, on the board, to sort of come up with that roadmap. But it certainly needs to be prioritized and deployed, right, for our country.
Moving then to Sudipto, your global partnership, and you mentioned that most of your companies do have their R&D houses as well as manufacturing in the country. The learning from BS6 has been great in many ways. In what way will that learning help the after-treatment device manufacturers to plan, technology point of view, not investment point of view, in much better way in the next stage emission norms? And we also know that we have the compliance conformity factors coming in. CF values will get notified. What impact does it have on the development?
That's a very good question, because when you look at the Indian market, it is split up into two very distinct groups. One is the Indian manufacturers, traditionally, like Tata's, Mahindra's, Ashok Leyland, Bajaj, TVS. And then you have the global manufacturers who have come in from India sometime in the 90s or early 2000s. The difference is that one has the technologies available in the European operations, whereas the other has to develop technologies in India. Now, when we in BS6, while developing that, we have learned one very important aspect, and one is that when you're developing something, let's say from scratch with a manufacturer who's based out of India over a long period of time, the opportunities for making product-specific developments are much more. Whereas on the other hand, the others are somewhat limited by whatever is already available. Having said that, in terms of numbers in the Indian market, the Indian automotive market, touch wood, will continue to grow again in double-digit later on, maybe once we're out of this current situation. And Indian automotive market is probably slated to become among the top, maybe 1, 2, or 3. So when that happens, the development in future, I expect, would be more India-centric and Indian requirements. And as we just heard yesterday as well as today, uh, the requirements for India are going to be much based on what our Indian customers expect. And those are, first of all, cost, secondly, reliability at low cost, and thirdly, uh, durability over a long period of time. So taking these in mind for any new development that comes, and here again I said, because there are various directions that we can grow, and that was what was discussed just in the previous session. One was, do we move to Euro 7? The other was, do we move to alternate fuels or other ways of development of engine and efficiencies? Uh, so depending on that, a lot of work will have to be done specific to the Indian market and product requirement for India for the direction in which the future regulations will move. I cannot at this point of time say in which direction it will move, but what I need to emphasize here is, just as we had this standing committee on emission score meetings and collective discussions on the direction that India should move, I think we need to have more emphasis and focus on this kind of discussion with stakeholders to be able to have a definite and doable map for India in the next maybe 3, 4, 5 years. And that is when I'm coming to the automotive mission plan 2026, and that is going to be very important, I think. So I am not aware of what is going on in this. Maybe someone, maybe Dr. Mathai can throw some light on that, but that would be very important in future.
Yeah. I will, before I come to Dr. Mathai, I would come to Diego because I know that he has also to leave a little early. You know, one important aspect that Dr. Reji Mathai earlier mentioned about doing measurements through ambient air quality and finding out what impact the policies had on the planned emission, performance of vehicles. We have huge resources to be spent in cleaning up our engines. These resources are truly very high, not in terms of money, manpower, everything. Uh, in the end, the customer gets high technology product to handle. Are we really looking at not just the benefit to cost analysis, but also where does the society want to go? Anjali mentioned about zero emissions. Are we clear as what Indian society wants in next 5 years, next 10 years? And then we all collectively can agree to move in that direction. Especially for the smaller engines, is that thought clear from technology point of view?
Yeah, okay. So I think that, okay, let's divide the matter from 2 points of view, in the sense that when we talk about Indian society, according to me, we have to distinguish what the final consumers want and what is the interest of the community expressed through regulation, norms, standard, and whatever. So experience is coming to, how to say, engine performance requirement. What we see, experience that we have here in India is that our consumers, both for three-wheeler and two-wheeler, want engines that are efficient, reliable, with high level of mileage, very low noise, and have a smooth drivability and how to say, handling, easy of handling in every kind of road condition. And so the kind of powertrain solution that we have developed at Piaggio in the last 5 to 10 years have been always addressed in this direction. To find the right compromise between performance, that in case of scooter can be meant through speed, acceleration, whatever it is, while for three-wheeler basically is payload. And the right compromise with mileage, efficiency, low emission, and whatever is connected to the environment. From the point of view, this is the development that we have taken in both the segments. For what is concerned the interest of a community, to be honest, I express a little bit of my personal confusion in terms of coming back to the roadmap and the term of way ahead, because honestly, personally, I have not yet understood this set of new regulations that are now in discussion, which is the final aim. The final aim is to provide the customer what I was talking about before. So engines that are more performing, better performing, and have low emission. Or is it instead the interest of, for example, reducing import of oil, or reducing, how to say, dependence of India from import from other countries or something like that? So I'm a little bit confused from this point of view, because I see, for example, when discussing about a new upcoming regulation, that there is also a tendency of address OEM to adopt a certain kind of technology. I think that it was Mr. Matai that at the beginning said a very important point, mentioned a very important point. I think that any kind of regulation that has to come, if it really wanted to address the consumer needs, must be totally technology agnostic. So must leave the OEM to express their know-how capability to meet the emission norm, independent by the kind of technology that is utilized. So independent if it is diesel, independent if it is talking about three-wheeler, if it is alternative fuel, if it is electric, it's my duty, it's my task to express how good I am in developing efficient powertrain solution. You have to give the consumer the possibility to make his own choice. Based on his needs, he may require to go for electric. Also for electric, he may require to go for a swappable solution, swappable battery solution, or a fixed battery solution. It must be his final choice. So there must not be, according to me, any kind of constraint or address given to OEM or to consumer to adopt a certain kind of technology. You have to express what is the final aim that you want to reach. Is it zero emission? Fine. Is zero emission? Let me, as OEM, develop technology and solutions that are meeting consumer needs, taking care of the regulation that is.
Clear, very clear picture. Dr. Mathai, what is your final take on listening to all these views? We know where India wants to go. We have a fuel crisis. We have not so green electric power. We have a large number of vehicle fleets going still on old powertrains. So in your view, if you were to draft final next stage emission roadmap, what are the focus areas now?
It's a question that I know will be hovering over in many minds as we are going to look into it. It's almost 7-8 years have passed from the previous auto fuel policy document came into being. I think we should start looking into the areas recommended and we have not been able to ably address in the initial drafts or in the documents, recommendations, because those had given a very, it was made for an holistic solution as such. It was not a solution to address only one aspect or the second aspect. So somehow I think this decade for India will be a crucial one where we are seeing a lot of new policies coming into being. Yes, the implementation, I can say the seriousness or the penalty linked to the implementation or the fastness in the implementation may still take some time. Let me address few of them. Like one was, there was a lot of requirement raised in the IN, the inspection and maintenance centers. And now the government is putting into place that but it is in a very slow pace and it has to be given its teeth. I think once maybe another 2-3 years on, and few of them coming into place, many of them coming into place in the district centers and all, we can see better regulatory mechanism being enforced, particularly on the older vehicles and in-service compliances part. Second is a scrappage policy that the government is putting into place. As many of them in the previous meetings or previous address also were mentioning on how polluting they are, how bad they are, how non-safe they are on the roads. I think this slowly will be addressed once government will put a ELV, the end of life vehicle policy into place and implementing. So all these things needs to come together. Means we can't say that if I am asked, means if anybody is asked now, we need to put all these pieces together, try to bring in a holistic solution rather than tightening on the emissions parts alone of the upcoming regulatory vehicles. That can anyway go on, because if you look into the CAFE norms, particularly why I'm addressing again, because the industry is finding it a little of a challenge now, and only it is for the passenger car as of now. The other sectors are still grappling with it, what is to be done. We need to give that a clear-cut guidelines, what is there and what is a penalty, because see, some people are very sincerely trying to get it. They should not be unduly penalized for attaining that. Means they should get some reward out of it, really. So those measures we had to discuss and we need to put into place in a very firm manner, saying that yes, this is how it is going to be and it is to be implemented. So if given such a clarity, I will be trying to put all these pieces together and trying to say that this is how it should be moving ahead.
Very clear thoughts. Just a last word from you, Anjali. You have been putting so much of technology on road, and there have been apprehensions, especially in the heavy vehicle segment, that with the complicated BS6 regulations, whether the technology will still sustain. Any takes on it and any learnings that we can put into drafting the next stage emission for heavy duty vehicles?
I think the big one is to be able to give time for technology getting matured in India. Rashmi, I think that will be very useful. The other one, in terms of just optimizing the overall development cycle, is to bring the norms together. So for example, fuel economy and emission norms, if they come together, it's one-time effort. Our engineers get into their respective technical centers and develop the right product for this market, right? I think those will be sort of the enablers. How we are coping up with it is by taking such platform approaches only. So for example, as we are introducing our next generation products, right, as the emissions change happen, we're making sure that the hurdle rate for emissions and fuel economy is crossed as we bring in the next platform. So that's how we've taken a platform approach to things, and sort of what that does is, in the short term, you may have more technology than what the regulation needs. But yeah, I think that's how you optimize between development, effort, and resources versus just making it right for that particular year. So that's where, if collectively we can focus and make sure that we are having buckets of model year changes, right, that enable OEMs and manufacturers to plan their resources. It just makes it a smoother transition. The entire environment and ecosystem gets ready, and the country moves to the next level of emissions improvement as well, right? So,
thank you, Anjali. So I think it's now time to close the sessions and open up the Q&A. I have on screen with me lots of questions.
Rashmi,
Yeah.
as I told you, I have to leave, unfortunately.
Yes, Diego, thank you very much. And thanks for joining in and good to connect again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye. I'll go to some question and answers which are posted by the audience. And there is one question which says with CAFE and RD norms coming in future, will testing of cars for fuel efficiency by ARA change to actual conditions rather than in lab testing? The question to you, Dr. Mathai.
See, now I think just to give a brief on how the conformity factors or RD is taken care now itself is to get to understand that with current the type approval, we are generating the data on the RD for that respective vehicle. This has made a part of the certifying norm, although it is not mandatory sort of a thing, but we have started generating that value and advising the manufacturer on how close and how far they are from the levels that we are thinking about, although it is not into place. Now the testing will continue the same way. Because once we have a very good correlation established, because currently, if you see the amount of data that is being generated, and this, I think this was an excellent thought process that has been put into practice, that we will generate a very good database on the on-road and the chassis, that means, and the MIDC test means that we are doing the certifying test that we are doing as of now, so that we have a robust mechanism to move ahead. So we have the flexibility on both, whether we should go an on-road or whether it should be done in the chassis dynamometer. That flexibility will remain with us. But let us see what the final take on it when we have a final decision on it, because I believe the data is well correlated and it is well accepted by the industry also, both the data now as of now.
Yes, and next question is also related to the same topic, and it says, is the RD conformity factors for BS 6.2 finalized and notified? And you partially already answered it.
Yeah, it is yet to be notified. We are just generating the database on it. I think the industry will be ready, because we have getting excellent results out of it. We have got very good results. The industry has responded very well to this call.
But I think it's important that we consolidate now the data and notify the CF values as early as possible.
Exactly.
Another question is, sometimes industry seeks additional time from government for meeting any notified norms, highlighting some challenges in industry like pandemic, etc. Will that be of any help or may create confusion among stakeholders? Request views of the panelists, please. So anybody can take that question.
So maybe I'll respond as a first thing is that, as I said earlier, that whatever roadmap we have and whatever norms have been finalized, unless there are compelling and absolutely imperative challenges, I think changing these or modifying these would probably hurt the industry, both from the OEM perspective as well as from the supplier perspective. So, well, there is something definitely in the point that there could be a condition where a force majeure condition where you could not probably help doing it, but then as far as possible, my point of view would be that there should be a stable environment in which all operators can work.
Yeah, but there will still be some contingencies, and anybody would like to react on it, Anjali?
I just wanted to add, completely agree with Mr. Basu, but just some flexibilities on supply chain may be needed to transition inventories, just because they are stuck and we couldn't make the sale because it's a pandemic lockdown, right? And I think we need to give considerations because it's a national waste that we create, right? Let alone meeting the emissions agenda, we create national waste by not allowing for that transition if there is a force majeure situation. All right. So agree with you that, hey, look, on the emission side, once we've decided the roadmap, there's enough time to transition. The investments have already gone in, and the readiness may be there. But because of this force majeure, if inventories are stuck, we allow for the transition to happen in a limited period of time.
Okay. There's one question coming in which says it's from Mr. Sardesai. If old vehicles still contribute much more to pollution, then perhaps we must have a plan to control that first, along with increasing durability limits for the next level of norms, so that gains from new norms are sustainable over the longer period.
I think the ELV policies are to be implemented, and it will take care of that aspect, because we are a cost conscious country with so many different stakeholders challenging. Once NGT gives an order, somebody it is challenged. So I think the government is focused on that, is very much understanding the requirement. We will be maybe this decade will see a very better policy. I strongly believe that.
May I also add, sir, that I think ARAI, we are also participating in that, is already in the process of conducting retrofit testing, and some work has already been done on a small truck, and then something is going to begin on passenger cars. So the retrofit is, of course, is one way of ensuring that older vehicles are to some extent improved in terms of emissions, but that could probably be a very, very long run out and difficult exercise. And I'm sure government is also looking at the vehicle scrappage policy much more seriously now. So maybe these two things are something, and Mr. Sardesai is right, of course, it's the older vehicles that pollute more, and there has to be a way to see how that can be reduced. So from that perspective, some work is being done, but maybe there could be some other ideas that we could probably also adapt.
Maybe in next 5 to 6 years, if once the BS6 penetrations become significant, another source apportionment study needs to be carried out in a focused manner, and then a better guidelines or boundaries can be made on how to address or how to achieve a better result out of it.
Right. I think measuring it on a continual basis was in fact recommended earlier also. We somehow have stopped at only a few cities and a few instances where measurements are done, and correlating it with the introduction of new technologies is what will make the difference in and also help in planning the future emission regulations. So I think all policies put together will make more impactful.
Yeah, ma'am. Just to add to that, many of the states are now quite focused on that. We are getting a lot of requests from the states stating that please carry out these studies and suggest what more needs to be done. I think that consciousness has come in, and we can. That's why I'm very hopeful for this time, the coming times.
Right. So I think with that positive note, we can conclude today's deliberations, and I am really thankful to all of you for putting in clear views on the subjects which are of immense importance in planning the future emission regulations, in setting the roadmaps in much clearer direction.